Hello and welcome to the Dash Podcast. I'm your host, Trey Gamage, and I have Mr. Phil Brown joining me today of High Five Adventure, an experiential based SEL program and curriculum they do with outdoor learning. So we're super excited to talk with Phil today and about all the things that they're doing to empower people, build connections, and create change. Before we get started with our conversation, though, I want to point you to treygamers.com, where you can find my first book, Every Decision Counts, 8 Lessons I Wish They Taught Me in School. It's a social and emotional learning workbook for middle and high school students, and I'm excited for you to purchase a copy for your student or for your entire classroom. So go visit treygamers.com to do that and subscribe to the Dash Podcast so you don't miss out on any episodes that we post every week featuring educators who are solving problems for school communities. And without further ado, Mr. Phil, how are you doing today?
I am very good. Thank you so much for having me on. I
Yes,
appreciate
sir.
the invite.
I mean, it's how could I not? I mean, it's so exciting looking at High Five Adventure. I mean, you've got high ropes courses, you've got
Yeah.
educator trainings, teacher trainings, certifications. Can you just tell us about High Five and the work that you do?
Yeah, so we're a non-profit education center based out of Brattleboro, Vermont, in the northeast of the US. And we focus on so many different parts. We do education in the classroom with kids in the actual classroom, bringing adventure learning and experiential learning into the classroom. So that's unrelated to even the high components than or even the outside. So there's a lot of principles that we take into the classroom that have been really beneficial and focusing on the castle core competencies of SEL. So we kind of combine those two pieces.
Yeah.
We also build and train on challenge courses, so ropes courses. So those for us are a tool. There are plenty of places out there you can go and do like zip line tours and aero adventure park stuff. That's not us.
Hmm.
We use just the challenge course, and that's the reason why we call it a challenge course, as a place to be able to, as a tool to be able to get the most out of people who are going through the process.
Yeah.
It allows people to be able to stretch themselves in ways that sometimes in the classroom you can't get because I tend to say that heights are the great equalizer for people. You know, like you can get the headstrong people, and you get them up into the trees. That changes the dynamic, and you
Yeah.
get to see people in their
Yeah.
extremes. And then we also do team development and leadership work with adults, so corporate groups all the way to sports teams. Our biggest claim to fame is we work with the NHL, National
Oh
Hockey
wow.
League, and we worked with the Boston Bruins in 2011 when they won the Stanley Cup.
Hmm.
And we've continued that relationship with that world. So we branch across like quite a range. Me myself, my job description is a trainer, and my job is to teach adults how to incorporate some of the learnings that we do into the work they do. So I traveled across the country, mainly in the Northeast, but I do travel the country teaching people at conferences and doing workshops on how to bring adventure and experiential education into the work they do with their youth. And for
Yeah.
me, that's, I get a lot out of that because I get to spread the word almost, rather than specific working. But I'd say, 10, 15, 20% of my work, I do work with youth still. I think it's
Hmm.
important to keep connected to that world. You can't train adults to do it if you don't do it yourself. So I try to
Right.
make sure I also do it. But that's high five in a grand scheme. We also
Yeah.
produce team development products, so stuff for the classroom outside of the challenge course world. So um, you can see all that stuff on our website.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate too the fact that it's not just training on site. You don't have to
Hmm.
come to High Five and do the adventures to be able
Hmm.
to get the benefit of, it's hey, here's
Absolutely.
here's some of the things that we can do, but here's how you can also take it back to your classroom. What are some of the ways? So with the
Yeah.
with the elements that you have on site, what are some of the ways that you're able to help transition that experience to the classroom?
So what we do is we've taken some of what are called low elements, and low elements are ones where you're not physically attached to a rope and wearing a harness and helmet and up in the trees, but you're supporting each other through a process on the ground, and that's either a couple of inches off the ground or even just specifically on the ground. And so we do have a whole curriculum of activities that focus on connection, then
Yeah.
empowerment, and then leadership that combine them. One of the products for us that's probably been the biggest is a deck of cards that we produced in 2011 called Ubuntu. And I
Mm.
don't know if Trey, if you're familiar with that, with the term Ubuntu, but it's from the Bantu dialects in South Africa, and it essentially translates into human connection and human kindness.
Okay.
That I am because we are, and we like that phrasing. And so, especially for experiential education, one of the tenets of it is connection before content. So before
Mm.
anyone tries to teach anything to someone, actually gives them content, we should be focusing on the way that we connect with each other. And I think that, you probably experience this too, Trey. This is where I find that we're constantly needed in the school environment, where the school traditional way of teaching is focused on these testing outcomes. And we've got to get them good at English, we've got to get them good at math and good at science. But what sometimes the schools unfortunately lack in is the social connection between people. How do we act as human beings? How do we act between each other? And how do we act as a collective? And then go out into the real world and do that. So
Hmm.
one of those key things to us is all about connection. So we've got this deck of cards called Ubuntu that uses imagery to try to create connection. And we have 32 activities you can do with that single deck of cards. And so that is a great way to just throw in adventure principles into your schoolwork, just by grabbing one of those decks of cards. So
Right.
they've been pretty good for us, but we also try to bring in other props and products that we can bring into the classroom and still involve some of this mindset of adventure, which is
Hmm.
by taking challenges, putting yourself out there where you're not comfortable. And that doesn't have to be physical. Sometimes that's a case of speaking it out, in front
Right.
in front of your peers. And some for that adventure is key, but trying to combine those two together. So we still do a large chunk of the activity focus in the classroom without the necessity to go out and use those giant big tools. And I
Yeah.
think that's where sometimes the challenge course gets misused. I think they see it as this is a thrill seeking event. And
Hmm.
for us, it's more, this is part of the development. If we've spent a lot of time getting kids to advocate for themselves on the ground, where it comes to physical connection and advocating for their voice to be heard and empowering them to make decisions for themselves, when we bring it out to the challenge course, let's say that's that final tool, are they able to advocate for themselves when the group is saying, climb higher, go higher, and that kid clearly doesn't want to? Are they in that moment prepped to be able to do that? We run a workshop called The Struggle is Real. And what we mention with that is that how are we best prepping participants? How are we best prepping children to be able to go out into the world and be able to advocate for themselves? Because the
Right.
world is a struggle.
Yeah.
If we're always creating mindsets where they're always going to quote unquote succeed, then when they go into the world and suddenly fail, how that dramatically affects their ability to be able to cope with that failure.
Hmm.
So with all of our stuff, there's a tenant. We didn't create this, but it's in the experiential world by a company called Project Adventure, and they created this phrasing called challenge by choice.
Mm.
And what it essentially means is that we want to empower people to be able to make their own choices about their own level of challenge.
Yeah.
Back in Outward Bound days, and Outward Bound is an organization where a lot of adventure principles come from, where they used to take kids, often trouble kids who had been, probably look like they may be going to jail. Let's prep them beforehand. We're going to take them out into the wilderness and shock them, into this is change. That was a little bit more forceful. And they used to say that we're pushing people out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Our mindsets are changed around that phrasing now. And it's now, how are we facilitating their ability as individuals to take themselves out of their comfort zone?
Hmm.
Because if I force you into something, you're either going to have a possible positive impact, but you may as well have a completely opposite negative impact.
Yeah.
I had my wife. This is a slightly different subject, but my wife has a terrible fear of theme parks. So I can't ever get her to go to on a theme park, and it's because her dad, when she went as a kid, he would shake him and make her scared of stuff. What
Yeah.
he did in that moment was create a massive negative
Wow.
impact on that experience. She was pushing herself out of her challenge zone or comfort zone and then pushed into panic.
Mm.
Whereas we're trying to encourage people through the tools we use to step themselves and facilitate their own ability to be able to get themselves out of their comfort zone, because that is important, but we don't want it to be forceful. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes we see that. with adventure stuff, I think that people have in their brain that they're going to be like rappelling off a cliff or skydiving or stuff. But
Right.
for us, adventure is more like, how do you challenge yourself? How do you go for an adventurous period in your own life? How do you define adventure and bring that into the work you do?
For sure. It's more of an internal kind of grappling growth mindset type of situation. I mean, that's
Yeah.
cool. I remember one of my early jobs in education, I worked for an adventure-based company, nonprofit called Cypress Adventures. And so we did a
Mm.
lot of similar things, different challenges. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember that term, challenge by choice. We did a lot of
Yeah.
restorative circles in
Yep.
different learnings that really challenge the kids to grow and to learn. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious when it comes to schools, you may take a field trip to High Five Adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing, or are schools implementing this stuff more in their gym practices, or is it with your structured content as well as your core content as well?
Yeah, I would say early on for us as an industry, we've been in org for 20 years, and I would say even up into the last 5 years, mainly when it came to school interaction, it was through physical education,
Hmm.
and it was mainly because I think that the physical education departments have an easier way of being able to insert some of our stuff
Yeah,
because it's a little bit more physical minded.
yeah,
What we have been doing, however, is we super encourage its integration into all classrooms. And so what we've created is we've got a program called Edge of Leadership. And the Edge of Leadership program is now predominantly working in schools. They book into their programs by coming out to us once in the fall and then once later in the spring. But then every program from that point on is in the classroom. We follow kids from fifth grade all the way up to 12.
mm,
So we're following these same kids all the way through, and we started 5 years ago, and we've got an independent study going on and watching the progression of these kids. But what is important for us and what we do is it's not just focused on the students, but it's focused on the school as a whole. So not only are we working with the kids in the classrooms, we're also working with the teachers and the other faculty to get them also on board and bought into the program. Because I think that the problem from an SEL perspective and social emotional learning at the moment is seemingly it's very popular. The
yeah,
terminology is popular, but we've been doing it for decades.
yeah,
And what we don't want it to be is we don't want it to be another buzzword.
hmm,
We want it to be something that it continues on because we see the viability in the potential for it and the growth for it. And so what we need to do is try to get it built into the mindsets of the staff, because if we were then to leave and let them go and continue the program on their own, they need to be brought in. They need to have the energy and they need to understand why they're doing certain things. Why are they focusing on emotional literacy, as an example, in this moment right now, when they could be focusing on teaching them algebra? So there's like, they've, teachers have a tough thing because they're always trying to balance what is necessary in the moment and what can they contain in their school life that's not going to feel overwhelming. So what we're trying to do is work in collaboration with the school and get them on board. So we've got teachers for High Five that go into the classroom and run the programming, and they do that once every single day, different classes, different single day of the school for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. But the aim is ultimately to pull our staff away from that school and let the school then
hmm,
self-facilitate it, so be able to run it
yeah,
themselves. What's fortunate for us is we just got written into the curriculum for Keene, New Hampshire School District. So we have got written in now, and so it is moving forward. The hope the next few years, and what's benefiting currently right now because everything is slowed down and we can't actually access school, is that we've had the time to be able to continue the development of this. And the aim is to be able to have this be something that we can roll out and create training models that me as a trainer, I could start teaching others.
yeah,
We're still sort of laboratory style, but what we're trying to do is we've been trying to, we know the power of the work we do. And unfortunately, there is this mindset because we work in the outside world and adventure and challenge course that you need to have a challenge course or you need to go outside to be able to experience it. And so what we've been trying to do is reframe ourselves to be able to say what we have is very valuable. People still want the lessons that can be taught in the same modalities. We can just bring it into the classroom instead and create that buy-in and then allow for schools to be able to replicate it. So that's our aim, to try to get it into schools, and hopefully in the next year or two we'll be able to have studies to prove. One early thing from this independent study is that in the last 4 years, disciplinary action in that school district has gone down 33%.
Hmm.
So that's kids being brought in to see the principal or go through detentions has already been reduced by 33%. So that's a great marker for the work we do. And I think that that's a, social emotional learning, because we're sort of pseudo education. We haven't really had tons and tons of evidence to say this is why schools need to adopt these principles.
Right.
So it's nice that we're, at least for our stuff on adventure education, we're starting to get this study come out, and we'll
Yeah.
aim to publish that soon.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, congratulations on getting to a school district and
Yeah.
on the data that you've been able to collect through your work. I think that's, really special and really important. SEL is starting to become more of a standard than it
Hmm.
is a trend. And it's unfortunately it's taken 30 years plus,
I know. Yeah.
to be able to make that happen. But I think it's so worth it. I was talking
Hmm.
to one of the early adopters of SEL and researchers, Maurice J. Elias. He has
Hmm.
a lot of work that he does with Rutgers, and I was asking him, what's the balance between SEL and learning? He said
Hmm.
SEL is to learning as the alphabet is to reading. You can't have
Oh,
one without the other. And I was like, wow,
yep.
that's really cool. That makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense. And I think the work that you're doing makes a lot of sense as well. Have you heard of asset-based community development?
I haven't. No.
I
Tell
mean,
me more.
it's very similar to what
Hmm.
we're talking about here. It's
Mm.
essentially it's community building,
Yep.
similar to what we're talking about in SEL. But it basically says when you go into a community, instead of going in and saying, "Hey, here's what we're going to do to help you," you go
Mm.
in and ask, "How do you need help?" And you
Yep.
essentially use the talents, the tools, and the resources that exist in that community to
Hmm.
create producers instead of consumers. And so
Yeah.
that's the same thing we're doing with SEL, and what you're talking about here is you're building teacher capacity,
Hmm.
student capacity so that they can become the people that are producing these mindsets and life-changing abilities to deal with the struggles of life through. And so there's that connection of asset-based community development.
Yeah.
It really helps me bring the big picture of SEL in the school community together, because it's not just students or parents, but the adults and your partners as well.
And I think that's where it's important, because we interact with so many other orgs and other individuals that do the same kind of programming that we do.
Yeah,
But the downside, I think, sometimes when you see it is they come into school, and let's say I was going to be doing the Phil Brown program, that only Phil could do that program. And
yeah,
I think that's the problem, is what we need to do probably as an industry is consider what are the things that we can teach others, what
mhm,
skills are we giving them, because that's going to spread the word of it in a much bigger way. We can only hit so many touch points if we try to do it ourselves, but try to go into a school system and say, what do you need from me? Like, this is the expertise we have, but
yeah,
what do you need from me, rather than saying, this is what I could do in this hour, but
yeah,
then after the hour's done, where do we go from there? And I
exactly.
think that's what's been good for us over the last few years, is because we've been able to create a relationship. And one of the core things for us is connection. So if we were able to create that relationship with a client and then stay in that system for multiple years, not only, what's really great for our, like, our edu leadership teachers that go into the classrooms, is they've created connections with their students now in the same way that the teachers did. So, and they've also made connections with those teachers. So that whole district is benefiting not just from the content that we're given, but also the connections that are formed from our educators. So that long-term pathway, I think, is so important. How do we connect with the client first and foremost? Then how do we work with them? But then what's the follow-up afterwards? As me as a trainer, because I teach, I'm all about teaching the skills. I want to make sure that I don't, my only touch point isn't the time I see them the one time and then I wave goodbye and fingers crossed hope they got it. Like, I stay with those people consistently, and we
Yeah,
build those relationships so that at any point, I'm still having it today with everything's going on, that I get clients call me up and say, Phil, give me some advice on how I can take this activity and bring it into the virtual world. Well,
hmm
those things are all important. Like, how do we stay connected with each other? That only is going to build our entire industry as well as the clients that we work with.
Well, and I think that is a great point as well. And I think our climate, while we hopefully we will get back to school and get back to normal after coronavirus and everything. But
Hmm.
I have been hearing about some schools considering closing all the way through December
Yep.
already. So
Hmm.
how do you feel like, or in what ways can you implement experiential based SEL virtually?
Yeah, great question. So we're going through that mode right now as a training team about looking at all the tools. And what's been exciting for us, there's lots of negatives at the moment, but there's some positives is that we're getting a grasp on technology and utilizing it in ways that I think that will benefit even past this.
Yeah,
So we've been playing around with Zoom and the ways that you can play around with Zoom and still have interaction with people's faces, still see people through the video. There's this as a trainer, there's a platform called Flipgrid, which
yeah,
I've been enjoying because that allows you to be able to create curriculums and have people report back and send in video and stay connected. What I think is really important, and I was discussing this with a group recently, is about owning our vulnerability around this stuff. And I think that what that does is going to be as important as the content, because social emotional learning is a big part of it is role modeling behaviors that we hope people were
mm,
able to
mm,
see. And as the adults working with those kids, we've realized that a lot of the stuff we do is role modeling. We need to be really, really key on what our emotions are and be able to advocate for them and be okay with them. So when we're in periods of frustration, I was on a webinar. I led a webinar for ACA, which is the American Camping Association, a few weeks ago. And it was my first time doing a webinar with a large group of people. And I found it very, very awkward. But what I was able to do is I advocated for the vulnerability of it. I just was honest, and it was interesting how in that moment being able to say how vulnerable I was, how the group I was working with suddenly brought in a lot more to the stuff I was sharing. And I think that that's the important thing. We don't have to be experts right now, but what we do have to do is still maintain connection. And there's plenty of activities and discussions and dialogues that we can go through and teach stuff. There's a lot of people doing a lot of great work as well, sharing resources at the moment. So
yeah,
a shout out to Michelle Cummings. If you go, I think if you just check her out on YouTube, Michelle Cummings, or Training Wheels, which is her organization, she's
mm,
been putting out there virtual team building activities you can do using online, and some of that is applicable to the work that you might do,
yeah,
um, what it does give you is it gives me, at least allows me to see what is possible with the current tech out there. Because experiential learning as a modality is all about learning through experience. So I have to be able to practice what I preach in that regard and learn through it too, because it's a struggle. And a lot of sleepless nights thinking about how do we exactly accurately do what we're doing and try to translate into a world where we might be either doing it virtually or even when we get back together, maybe physically distant. It
mm,
still might not be the same as what it used to be. And so, things like high fives, even as our name is high five, like even that as a physical act might not
yeah,
occur. So it's like, there's a lot of lenses, unfortunately, to think about when it comes to how do we stay connected. I do a workshop called The Power of Play, and what in there I talk about the four neurochemicals in our brain that makes us feel joy, and those four chemicals are endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. And oxytocin you get from physical connection, and that is actually like high fiving, handshakes, hugs. And that what oxytocin does is help bond people into trusting relationships. That's why when you go into an interview for the first time and someone doesn't shake your hand, you kind of have this weird like, I don't know how I feel about this person. But if they connect physically, then there's a moment of a short period of trust formed. So there is concern that if we get to a certain point where we lose that ability to physically connect, how that will affect our ability to overly socially connect with each other. So I know there's concerns, and I think that we'll get through it. But the grass is, like the silver lining, sorry, is that I think that our work, social emotional learning, is going to be more important, if not as important, but more important when we get post this, because I think the desire to connect, we're social human beings. So the desire to connect, the desire to talk about how we interact with others is going to be so important. We, as the educators and trainers of that world, just have to be doing a lot of work to alter what we've done in the past to be able to meet our needs of our clients still. But I'm optimistic.
Yes, sir. I feel like we don't really have a choice but to be optimistic, and
Yeah.
we're gonna learn really quick the value of the work that you and I are doing. SEL
Hmm.
is to learning as the alphabet is to reading. So I mean,
Yeah.
this has to be a staple. It has to be something that we really are intentional about inputting and um, implementing with fidelity in our classrooms from now and forever. I hope this really is what gets us over the hump and lets
Hmm.
all school districts realize the value of SEL
Yep.
for
Absolutely.
sure. So tell me, Phil, where can we go if we want to know more about High Five or getting some virtual or even on-site tips? What's the best places we can go to talk to you?
Yeah, so you can check out our website at high5adventure.org, and it's the number five, so HIGH, as in being high, the number five adventure.org. That's our website. You can email me, and I'm happy to answer any questions on adventure and experiential learning at pbrown, so that's PBROWN at high5adventure.org, all the same as the website. And then a couple of resources that I recommend to people if they're wanting some information is one, High Five does have a podcast also. It's called a Vertical Playpen, and I happen to be the host of that. So Vertical Playpen, and you can there's resources and information on adventure programming in those episodes. We've got 50 episodes so far.
Hmm.
And
All right.
then as well, there's a resource that I'm not necessarily associated with this one, but I found this to be a really helpful resource, and it's called playmeo.com. So it's PLAYMEO.com, and that is an online database of activities, games, initiative activities, problem solving, all of that kind of stuff, into one database. It is a subscription-based one, although they do offer like 25 free activities per month, but as a subscription otherwise. But the real great thing I've found to people like all my trainees when I teach them these stuff is that it has video. You can find tons of books out there on activities to do with your participants, but I myself struggle with reading the activity from a book and sometimes knowing what it looks like. So it's nice to see it used. So they have video on Playmeo, which I found as a really helpful resource. So
Yeah.
that's playmeo.com.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for all the information and insights
Yeah.
that you shared with us, all the work that you're doing with
Hmm.
SEL and experiential based learning. You're making a big difference, and I'm excited to continue to reach out to you and see if
Absolutely.
there's ways that we can work together, maybe even in the
Oh,
future.
absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, Trey. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you for listening to the Dash Podcast. Every week we feature educators just like Phil Brown who are solving problems for school communities. So you can go to TreyGamers.com right now to subscribe so you will never miss another episode. And while you're there, you'll learn about my new book, Every Decision Counts, and our new coaching program, Getting Unstuck, 4 Steps to Your Best You. Check out TreyGamers.com for all your info, and we will see you next time. This is the Dash.